There's one. There we go. This bait does catch fish. All fish, even little bitty ones. Oh, look at that little guy. What's going on, guys? This is Gene Jensen. And today I am finally making a video about a Senko. I'm going to talk about all the little details, the different ways to fish this little bait, and the ways that have been successful for me in the past, and just dive into the dirty details of a Senko. All right, so the first technique I want to talk about is a Wacky Rig. It is the most popular way to fish a Senko. And it is a rig. You can fish any soft plastic Wacky style, but this is how I've fine-tuned it and figured out, one, how to make your Senko last longer on the hook, and two, how to make it a little bit easier to rig, and how to make it, you can catch and hook more fish doing it. Right, let's start off. First thing we're gonna start off with is the rods and the reels. With a Wacky Rig, you're throwing it weightless, but a Senko and any other type of a stick bait are fairly heavy, so you can throw it on a medium power bait caster, 7.3 to 1, 8.1 to 1 gear ratio reel, whatever. I mean, it really doesn't matter with the reel. But with this one, I'm throwing it on a medium power spinning rod, a 2000 size reel. I've got 20-pound braid as a main line to a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. And that is connected with, let me get a little bit more slack in the line. That's connected with an FG knot. That nice little thin knot right there that you never hear go through the guides. So, I want you to look real closely about of how I've got this thing rigged up, okay? Most people rig it with an O-ring. And when you rig it with an O-ring, your hook is turned sideways like this. And what I've found is a lot of times when the fish bite, it bunches up the soft plastic right here, and you never get a good hook set when your hook is going the same direction as the worm. So you really want your hook to be 90 degrees to the worm. And I do that by using some heat shrink. Something new I started this year, and it does two things. It solves the biggest problem, which is a Senko is really fragile. It's not very durable. Two fish is about it for most of the time, especially when you're fishing it with an O-ring or just fishing it with nothing in the middle at all. But with the heat shrink, it's a little bit wider. It's clear, which is awesome, but it is very durable, and it gives you a wider section of your worm to where it is a lot more durable, and the fish can't throw it off, rip it off or throw it off when they're fighting. Number two is the hook stays in it. This hook is really hard to get out, and so it's going to last a long time. It's going to stay on there a long time. You almost have to cut it off when you have to replace it. So it's really good. Let me talk about how I do this. Now, this is a 3/8 inch clear heat shrink that I got off of Amazon. I'll leave all the links to all of my stuff I've used down in the description. And it's a 3/8 inch, and then I have a lighter that I keep in my tackle box, and you just slide that 3/8 inch heat shrink over the end of it, slide it all the way down to almost to that little egg sac right there, so you're almost dead center. And then you take your lighter out and you light it and you heat it up, and it shrinks pretty quick. You don't have to do it very much, and you're not going to melt the worm. Stick your hook in there and have a whole lot of fun. I mean, that is how I rig a Wacky Rig Senko, and it really does work good. Now let's talk about how to fish it. All right, so history with me is I don't like to fish a Senko. I do when people don't know it, but I do when I need to catch a fish, or when I'm fishing in a tournament and the bite's really tough, I will throw a Senko, and I do it quite often. But the way you fish it is pretty simple. You got to think of when that worm hits the water, the amount of salt and stuff that are in a Senko or in a stick bait, as it's falling, it's wiggling. It's got this little wiggling action as it falls, and we'll do some underwater footage and show you while I'm talking about it. But it wiggles as it falls, and that seems to be a really non-intrusive, enticing action for the fish. But I'm gonna throw it out, and I'm gonna let it sink on a slack line, and I'm watching my line. One of the critical things about fishing a weightless Senko is I have this high-vis Seaguar smackdown braid, and I can sit there and watch the line, and I can see it on the water, and when the fish bites, it'll twitch a little bit, or it'll just start swimming away when it's not supposed to. So I'll pop it up. It went to the bottom, and I popped it up, and when I pop it, I want to shake my rod so it comes up like this, and then let it fall back down nice and easy on a slack line. And there's two different times the bass are really going to bite it. They're going to bite it on the fall, or they're going to bite it after it hits the bottom and it's been sitting there for a minute. So one of the things I do that a lot of people don't talk about is once it gets down to the bottom, I don't really pop it up yet. I shake it, and then I pop it up, and I let it fall back down. All right, so before we jump into the next rig, I want to talk about the actual stick bait itself. There's really two different brands of stick bait that I fish 100% of the time. There are a lot of other ones out there. They work just as good. I know Big Bites has them, and there's tons of companies that have a stick bait. But the two that I keep on me all the time are the KVD Perfect Plastic. Ocho is one of the ones, and I love some of the colors they have. This is green pumpkin candy, and I pretty much fish that 100% of the time, or they're straight green pumpkin. And then the Yamamoto 5-inch are the ones that I keep the most, and these are either in black and blue or in green pumpkin. So really the only two colors that I fish are green pumpkin and black and blue, and 5-inch. I will go up to the larger 6-inch, but most of the time I'm just throwing this because I'm trying to get any fish to bite, and a little fish will even hit this little 5-inch Senko. All right, so the hooks are real important, and I have 3 different types of wacky hooks that I throw. One is the G-Finesse weedless wacky. The other one is a finesse wide gap hook is what it's called, and the other one is called a wicked wacky, I believe. And the wicked wacky is really good because it's styled after the old K-heel hooks. And years ago, I was guiding a couple of old guys. They showed up with these giant K-heel hooks that they had rigged with these 2 little wires coming off of them to make them weedless. They literally had hand tied all these hooks, and back then I was having a hard time getting bass to stay on the hook when I was fishing wacky style. And those K-heel hooks and those weed guards, the way those guys had them set up, they landed every single fish that they hooked. All right, so this next one is the Texas rig, and I love to fish a Senko on a Texas rig. And there's several reasons we'll talk about in just a second, but let's talk about how to rig it. I use 2 different hooks, 2 different style hooks. I use the G-Finesse flipping hook, light wire flipping hook, and I use a EWG either in 3/0 or 4/0. This is a 3/0. You can see there's not a whole lot of gap here. I tend to go towards a 4/0. I just didn't bring them with me, but EWG or some type of a flipping hook. Now with the weights, the heaviest weight that I'm going to use is a 1/2 ounce. This is a 3/8, but a 1/2 ounce tungsten weight with a pegger or a punch stop up front, and I'm gonna slide that punch stop all the way up against there. Okay, and then to rig it, you can either rig it Texas style with that extra wide gap hook, or with this one I'm just gonna go through at an angle, slide it down, flip it over, line it up, and go just like that. And that's how, and this punch stop is critical for the way that I like to fish it. And let's talk about that. All right, so what I think is the reason the Texas rig is so effective, it is a Texas rig Senko is so effective, is that it is a great flipping bait. And the reason is when it falls, as it's falling down, it falls in a spiral, okay? And so as it falls in a spiral, that is such a great attracting action to a bass. Tubes did that, and a whole bunch of other different baits, the ones that spiral on the way down. And that's the reason why I'm not going to use a super heavy weight, anything heavier than a 1/2 ounce, because it takes that spiral away. But when you're covering water, when you're flipping cover or flipping brush or just flipping along the bank, you just throw it out and let it sink on a semi-slack line or a slack line. And as it's falling, it's spiraling down, and just pop it up. And as I'm working cover and as I'm working the bank, I'm just running along the bank and I'm just flipping and pitching. Now the rod that I'm going to be using is I use a medium heavy, a 7'3". Make sure it's 7'3". Yep, 7'3" medium heavy rod, an 8:1 gear ratio reel, 15 to 20 pound test fluorocarbon line, and I'm going to be ready to jack them is basically what it is. So this is not a finesse technique. It is not meant to be one. You're flipping into heavy cover. Now there's a couple of other tricks you can do, and I'm going to pull this Senko, or this is an Ocho. I'm going to pull this Ocho off of this hook, and I'm going to take this extra wide gap hook and I'm going to show you a trick. Now, pretend there's a line hooked up to this or tied to this hook and a sinker up in front of it. Actually, no. Pretend there's line tied to it with no sinker. I'm fishing it weightless, but I'm still going to Texas rig it. But instead of doing it like you normally do, bring it in and bring it out, and then by the time you're done rigging it, the eye of the hook is right there on the tip of it. What I want to do is I want to take and I want to bring it down. And I want to bring it down, and I want to bring it down, and I want to pull it through, and then I want to work that hook all the way down until that bend, that offset bend, comes out right there just like that. And then I'm going to Texas rig it behind, or run the hook behind the egg sac, and then skin it like this. Now weightless, rigged like this with the hook being the weight, rigged back in the back of or further towards the back of the worm, it causes that worm as it falls not to fall down like it normally would, but to fall away from you. So if you're fishing under docks or you're fishing under trees that are laying down like this, you throw it up in there, and if the bass are sitting like on this seawall that's right here, that bait will fall towards the bass and right into their face, and it causes them to bite. That's a simple little trick. Now if you go just a little further up, it'll cause that worm to fall just like this a little bit better, and it won't go nose down. So you can play around with where that hook is, and it works great. So but you do that weightless. So here's another one that can be done with a bait caster, can be done with a spinning rod. It's basically it's kind of the original method that Gary Yamamoto had in mind when he designed the Senko, and that's to nose hook it. So you take a little, wide gap finesse hook and get it to where you guys can see it. I'm literally just going to nose hook it. Now this is not going to make your worm last very long. Okay. This is one of those that it really you have 100% of the action on the worm and everything else, but you're only going to catch one fish per worm, whether you're using a Yamamoto or any other style bait. But you nose hook it just like that, and you fish it just like you would a wacky. You throw it out, let it sink to the bottom, you work it. Now, the other option to fish it is you can fish it like a jerk bait. Throw it out, pop, 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 and let it sink a little bit, and pop, 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 and let it sink if the fish are really active, and you'll get a ton of bites. But like I said, it's not going to last very long. But man, when you have no choice, when you're fishing a tournament and you really need them to get to bite, and you're desperate and you really want to catch some fish, that's a wonderful way to rig it and fish it. But like I said, I would not, if you're on a budget, I wouldn't recommend it because they're not going to last very long. All right, so the last rig I want to talk about is one that I fish all summer long. We're not quite in the summer yet, so I don't even have one rigged up. But a Carolina rig. Now, I learned how effective a Senko was on a Carolina rig completely on accident. I was out of my favorite bait, which was a Zoom speed worm, is what my favorite one was years ago, and I didn't have them, and I had 100% confidence in them. So the only thing I had that was somewhere close was a Senko, and the Zoom Speedworm is basically the same shape as a Senko with a kicktail on the back side of it. So I just took a Senko, threw it on a Carolina rig, and I spent 3 weeks, probably 4 days total, just whacking them on a Carolina Rig Senko. And so that's why I'm including it in this video, because it has worked so good for me over the years, and it is such a good I wouldn't call it unknown, but not very well known way of fishing a Senko. So I mean, I love it. So let's go, and I'm gonna grab a Texas rig, and I'm gonna grab a Wacky rig, and I'm gonna go see if I can catch a couple more fish before we end this video. Fish. Oh my gosh. He was so freaking small. I'm like, nope, not that one. I can't catch one bigger than this. But that's what's good about a Senko, is that a Senko is all about getting you to catch a fish when you just have to get your line pulled. It is one of those baits. It is the bait, man, really, that will just absolutely wreck them. And let me pop this hook out of the fish's mouth and let him go. I can't get my finger around the hook. There we go. But it catches them, and it's great for beginners. It's great for experts. It's great to save yourself during a tournament. It's just one of those baits that always seems to catch them. So go out and try it. Try these techniques, try what I've taught you, and have fun catching fish. But like I always say, be sure to introduce somebody to fishing. Introduce them to my channel. Let me help you teach them how to fish. More importantly, get out on the water. Go out and catch some fish, and have a great day. We'll see you.